Matthew's going to be the speaker today. So Matthew Walker is an employee of Medical Device Academy. He is actually acting as Director of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance for one of our clients that has a software as a medical device. And they're doing something interesting. A lot of companies are going from transition of their product is not CE mark now, and they're trying to get CE marking because the regulations have changed, and now their device is not considered uh, to be class 1 exempt anymore. Now it requires notified body involvement. His company that he's working with actually is going the opposite direction, and they're no longer being CE marked, so they have a transition the opposite way. So he's got an interesting experience there. I don't know how much of it he can talk about, but just the experience is an awesome, unique experience. And so if anybody else has got some general questions as I boot panelists off, let me know. And then I'll keep you on if you ask a question.
Well, if you'll promise not to keep me on, I'll ask a question.
Okay.
But I've had people actually look at me and, they're going like, Rick, you design products. Why do you sit in on things like this? And Rob, I've sat in live and virtually on a lot of your stuff. And they go, you're designing stuff. What does that have to do with regulatory? And I have literally changed designs and gone with and chosen.
Oh, shit. Oh, what did I do? I just cut off his question.
You lost him.
Well, I understood it because as a packaging engineer, I love to listen to quality stuff, and I will change designs of my packages depending upon what the quality issues are, if I'm allowed in early enough.
Yeah, we had a slide about packaging, and I was hoping that you would be on today because I think you could really contribute to that part of the conversation. And I've got some other people here that have put it.
Oh, Rick is back on. He can finish his question.
I have
Jan finished it. That was the whole context thing. I mean, stuff like this, especially in this industry, in the medical device industry. Oh my goodness, it has the regulatory environment has everything to do with it. I even had one guy totally change who was starting up a business. I had him totally change his documentation practices for our design history stuff based on things that I had heard from you as far back as, I don't know, 13 or 14, something like that.
If anybody has any questions, I realize that promoting everybody to panelists it's nice to have everybody involved, but I see very quickly because of the way this is set up, they can only talk if they're a panelist. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask or they want to speak, all you have to do is put a note in the box for Q&A, and I can promote you if you want to be promoted, or you can just ask the question, then I'll read the question. So please go ahead and just tell me if you want to be promoted, and I will do my best to keep up while Matthew's speaking. But I'm trying to boot everybody off here, all 14 panelists that I created so quickly. It's much easier to create than to boot.
It's perfectly okay, Rob. The more you speak, the less I have to.
Yeah, you act like you've never spoken before and you're afraid to death of it. But after last week, I know that's all bullshit. You did an awesome job last week. Matthew, we did a training last week where it was a live webinar internally, and he blew it out of the water. Like he covered basically this entire presentation in 10 minutes, but he did such an awesome job. I said, I'm not giving this presentation. You do it better than I do. So he was promoted to speaking this week. But I'm going to leave on Rick because he led with the first question. I'm going to leave on Jan because we have a section here on packaging, and so I can't think of anybody more qualified to talk about packaging than Jan. And if anybody else wants to be jumped up, let me know. Oh, and this is still saying I'm Joe Hage, and Joe asked me to change that. So he said he had already changed it, but obviously that's not the case. So there I am. I'm Rob Packard now. So for those of you that were wondering who I was, evidently I don't show up enough if you're wondering that. Okay, I think I've worked out all the bugs here. We get the slideshow going from the beginning here. This is a new slide deck, so any feedback on the slide deck is very welcome. I usually had that minimalist slide that was just white background and our logo on it. This is the only slide I think where we get the logo beating you over the head. But this is a new slide deck, and we actually had somebody create an infogram for us that's a little unique. So you'll probably see this infogram around. But people are always asking me, you know, when do we have to put in the quality system? Do we have to have the quality system before we submit the 510K? Do we have to have the quality system after we get the 510K? When should we start implementing different procedures? And so that's where this entire presentation came from is, you know, when will it be? And Dave is asking, will the slide deck be shared after the webinar? Yes, I will upload the slide deck to Slack channel. So those people that are members, all you have to do is go into the Slack channel and you get the slide deck. And then when Joe publishes the YouTube recording, people will be able to see the recording live as well. But the slide deck is something like 3,600 megs. So you're looking at almost a I'm sorry, not 3,600 megs, 3,600 kilobytes. So we get about 4 meg file here. So just small enough to email people, but long enough to be a pain in the butt. That's what you get when you hire graphics designers.
All right, we ready to kick this off, Rob?
Yes, you can kick us off. Matthew Walker is the speaker for today. He's a quality system consultant that works for Medical Device Academy, and he's been working with the company since 2017. He has essentially revised all our procedures at one point or another for Medical Device Academy. We sell procedures for quality systems, and he gets on the phone with clients and Zoom and walks them through what changes they need to make to our templates so they can implement it for themselves. He points out things that they need to change in the quality system implementation to fit their type of company and their type of products. His personal sort of specialties that he's really gravitated towards are what he calls the Trinity. Number one, cybersecurity. Number two, usability. And three, risk management. And how those three areas come together. If you were thinking of a Venn diagram, you have those three areas. The intersection of those is where he wants to play as a space, because that's where the entire industry is going. Everything is becoming interconnected through wireless technology, and we really need to start thinking more about integrating risk management, cybersecurity, and usability into the design of our design plans, into our risk management plans for any of these projects. You can't just leave them as an afterthought for the regulatory submission. They have to be built in right up front as part of your design plan. So with that commercial, I will let Matthew go ahead and start presenting.
Except we can't see him.
Yes, I don't know. Maybe I need to ask to start video. So Matthew will start video later.
I had started my video and then stopped. So I'm in here on both my computer and my phone.
Got it.
I was getting some weird feedback as you guys were talking, and it was slowing the audio down. So I hopped on my computer at the same time.
Okay.
When I'm done running my mouth, I'll hop back on the camera. I just want, for the important parts, I wanted to make sure that my audio was captured.
Perfect. Thank you. And I did ask to video on both of them, so I'm thinking it should work.
Yeah, well, I got the pop-ups. I'm just telling you no.
Okay. Got it.
All right. So I'm not sure how big our crowd is today, but from what I have gotten from feedback is, if you're hoping for a design perspective on quality systems, I think you'll be excited where this presentation's headed. Because when you look at design versus your 510K project versus your quality system, design is inherently involved in almost all of the processes. So it really is a perfect segue. And the best part about presentations like this is sometimes some of the most value added portions are just feedback from the crowd. So that I've worked with Rob for 5 years now, but sometimes I find I'm speaking and there's people who've been in it since the 70s. So it's always great to get that kind of feedback from the crowd, because you never know what kind of talent pool you're drawing from. But I think we've delayed as long as I think I can put this project off for, and I have to actually start the presentation. Let me double check my slides. All right, and Rob, you're going to handle going from one slide to the next, right?
Yep.
Perfect.
So you let me know when you
So-
want slide 2.
Fantastic. So this whole premise sort of kicked off with Rob wanted to do an internal training on 510K project management. And he had polled the employee pool asking, what sorts of things do you bump into when working with clients that would be a value added portion to bring into this project? And of course, because I'm not as heavily involved in regulatory submissions, I said, hey, Rob, why don't you talk about something that has absolutely nothing to do with the 510K, but you have to do at the same time that you're doing your 510K. And unfortunately, I did a good enough job presenting that Rob liked the idea, and it evolved into the presentation we're doing today. So when you look at your quality system perspective, there's sort of a scope for your whole project. Before you can sell your device, you need market approval. This is geared towards specifically a 510K, but very similar for a de novo process or CE marking. But it's the idea that you have ancillary tasks that need to be performed kind of in parallel or in tandem with your regulatory submission. And that's taking it from the idea phase of design to your post-market surveillance phase, where you're actually, you're making the money back on your investment. The assumption here is that there's a device that you want to put on the market and ideally sell it and make your money back. But there's a lot of processes that you really can't afford to wait until you have 510K clearance to start. And that's really what we're going to focus on, are those ancillary tandem processes that you should parallel with your regulatory submission. And I love that sentence because it's got a lot of great spooky buzzwords. And if nothing else, I like to have fun with these sorts of things. So I keyed in on the spooky buzzwords, and we'll break those down as we get into them in the project. So you can probably hit the next slide, Rob.
Slide 2 is up.
Fantastic. Look at that. You'll see that there's most of this presentation is going to be me running my mouth. It's very minimalist, but we're going to have a conversation about each of these tasks. They're presented in a numerical order, but not necessarily that they have to be completed specifically in that order. These are things that are very interconnected with each other, that it's difficult to disengage them as solitary elements of a regulatory submission. And the first thing to consider is when you're going to do a 510K, you're at the concept phase of your design, you really should be considering your design and risk management planning. That's going to be a required element for your quality system anyway. It's under design controls in the QSR, the FDA requires it. But really, the plan itself is what's going to set the stage for how you're going to complete all of these items in parallel with each other. So I know we had discussed design just a little bit before we really dove into the presentation, but this is probably the most important task out of the 10 we bring up. You can do a regulatory submission, but if you really want to get an A+ on it, you should start and heavily focus on both your design plan and your risk management plan. And because those two processes are so intertwined with each other, it just makes sense that you should do them in tandem with, they're interrelated, one affects the other, because you never know when you're going to find something in your risk management process that may lead to a design change. If you start your design and your risk management at the same time, it lets you sort of roll with those punches. You don't get farther in the design than you think you need to go, and then find out you have to backtrack because risk management came up with something that requires a design change. So if you start the very beginning of your regulatory submission process with your planning phase and get these ideas on paper, they can change as needed, but they form a skeleton for how smoothly this process can go. And at the same time, if you make a design change, you've got to go back and redo risk management anyway. So these are two processes that have to start with a documented plan. It has to be on paper, it has to be referenceable, and it really is the skeleton of how your project is going to move forward. And when I say project, this is in terms of you're doing a regulatory submission, you have a device, you want a 510K so you can bring it to the market. That's going to be the overarching goal for the presentation is that regulatory assumption.
I have something I wanted to add here. So a couple years ago, I created a template for design risk management plan where I combined the design plan with the risk management plan, put it all in one document. And I thought that would be a great idea. One of our employees, Mary Votter, she's in the process of splitting that template into 2 different templates. So we have a risk management template and a design template. It's not wrong, it's not better, it's different. And both of us articulated a lot of different points, but it depends on what product you're doing. If you're doing a product that is a complex hardware and software product, you probably want to split them because there's just too much detail in either one. There's almost too much detail for a design plan just for the hardware. If you have software only, like software as a medical device, you probably don't need either one by itself. In fact, you might even want to roll in your software development plan and have software design and risk all as one plan that's under software development. Because it's just software as a medical device. So there's fewer risks to worry about, and it's a much less complex product that you're developing when you just have software. But I'm curious, as sort of a polling item, if people could maybe type into the Q&A, what does your company use? And if you can clarify, are you doing hardware or software? Are you just doing hardware and there's no software at all? Is it a passive device or powered device? Is it software as a medical device? What kind of product are you developing, and are you combining them or separating them? Or maybe you're at we don't have either one, but we're almost done development, which is what I see from most of our clients. So you can always do it retroactively. Everybody ends up doing something retroactively, but trust me, your project will go smoother if you have a plan and you update it as you go along than if you have no plan whatsoever and then try to document everything retroactively from the design freeze. That's not the way to go. It leaves a lot of things left out, like, oh yeah, we need packaging, or oh yeah, we need to do shipping validation, or oh yeah, we need to age samples. Oh, we forgot we needed samples that are sterile. I mean, these are some things that get left out all the time. So first comment here, hardware and software almost done with development. So this is when Dave says this, you're saying you have a hardware plan and a software plan, or you're combining them or having them separate? Combine, separate, which is it? And I think we have another person that's trying to comment here as well. So the next person here says, so most of my clients keep the risk assessment separate from risk assessment, no software. And one thing to keep in mind for people that aren't aware, the risk management documentation doesn't need to be submitted directly to the FDA unless we're talking about software, except in some cases where the FDA has a guidance document that specifically says we recommend an abbreviated submission and we want you to include the risk management. So there are cases where you have a guidance document from the FDA says, please provide this. But for a software product, you already have that as part of the checklist. You have to provide the hazard documentation, and you have to provide the cybersecurity risks. And if you're going to be doing any kind of usability, the FDA is looking for a use-related risk analysis as well. So it's not all of the risk management file, it's usually pieces of it. Another person said here, hardware development almost complete, updating risk assessment daily using software and keeping updated records. So we get variations here. Rick said separating them in that I'm brought in for the stated purpose of the design. Separate, no software. So we got a lot of different, everybody's got something different, which is what I would expect. It's pick what's right for your company. There's not a right or a wrong. It's what works best for your company. You're required to have a software development plan, required to have a design plan, you're required to have a risk management plan, but there's nothing says you can't combine some or all of them. This is great. We're getting a lot of input from a lot of people. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Here's a trick question for you, Rob. You've touched
Sure.
on hardware, you've touched on software.
Mm-hmm.
Where does firmware sit?
So firmware is considered software by the FDA. So I get a lot of companies saying, well, we don't have any software, yet they have some electrode that has an EEPROM in it and they're programming it. So I'm like, well, you program the EEPROM, so yep, that's firmware and that's programmable, and therefore you have to validate it. I'm like, but that's so simple. There's not much. I'm like, so it shouldn't take you very long to validate it, should it? And if it's truly no risk, like they always say, there's no risk associated with this. If there's no risk associated with it, then you won't have any trouble documenting that, right? And that's usually not the case. And I'm like, well, what if it gives you the wrong calculation? I mean, what if the EEPROM is simply to keep track of how many times you use some probe? Well, if that doesn't calculate things correctly and it gives you the wrong number, then you're using the probe too many times. If it was only designed to work 5 times and you use it 25 times because the EEPROM isn't working properly, tracking the number of times that it was used, is that a risk? I think so. It's supposed to automatically shut off and not allow the person to keep on using the probe after so many uses, and that's not working. So that's a risk. In your software or firmware control isn't functioning. That's something the FDA is definitely going to want you to validate. So that's just an example of one simple. It's just a counter function. That's all it is for, and it physically can't hurt anybody if it unless it doesn't keep track of it and people just keep on using it. So it creates a hazardous situation. It doesn't cause direct harm to anybody. It creates a hazardous situation that could result in harm. So the probability of occurrence of harm is quite low, but there is still a remote possibility. And unfortunately, the severity of that is usually infection and septic shock. So that's pretty severe in terms of the severity of harm, but the probability of occurrence is extremely low because it doesn't cause direct harm. It creates this hazardous situation that even if it occurs, you still have to clean it improperly and have the device have some sort of infectious debris left on the product. And so that's a perfect example of the kinds of risk analysis we see for products like that. So we will go on to next slide, Matthew. Slide task 2.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So starting with design and risk management, we were referring specifically to the plan. A lot of times regulatory submissions and quality systems, it is a defined deliverable. So if you look in the QSR, the FDA will specifically state under design or design controls, you need to plan this out. So it's ideal to have a record that shows here is my design plan. Once you have a design plan, a risk management plan, you have to look at when during this process are you going to be completing those particular activities and what other processes are affected by it. So I had a direct message question regarding concentrating specifically on the design portion, about asking what kinds of questions would be good to line up for management of the client. And the best I can answer it is to really be cognizant of the interrelatability of the processes. If your focus is entirely design, there's an inherent level of risk management involved, but not necessarily that you're going to be the person that's doing those. So if you are designing a device and you're working through the stages of your design plan and the different phases of your design and development, be aware of when in that process does the client need to document activities that they're doing. Has a design change? Does it need to be reevaluated for risk? When do they have to complete their risk assessment? What information do you need from the risk management process to confidently move forward in the design process? So just define the interrelatability of it and make sure that it's very clear who owns what deliverables and what is needed before you can move forward from the current phase. For risk management specific activities, everybody's aware of hazard identification. You have to do a risk analysis. But there's something new that's popping up with increasing emphasis from the FDA, and that's we refer to it as the URA document. But what that is a use-related risk analysis, and that is going to take the risk analysis that you normally look at for the design process, but it's going to apply it specifically to human factors engineering or usability. And it's just that what risks does the usability of your device present? You need to look at what risks you can't engineer away and how you're mitigating it through your human factors engineering process. And that's just a document that looks at the specifically use-related ones, because most devices, you can't inherently engineer away every risk. You do your best, but it's just not realistic that you're going to hit 100% of the items in your foreseeable misuse. One of the things to consider if you're dealing with firmware or software as a medical device is whether or not cybersecurity applies. And once you have cybersecurity involved, you have to look at separately risk and security. And I think in a separate slide, we might touch on the specific standards for that. but there is an AAMI standard that covers cybersecurity for medical devices, and it parallels what ISO 14971 does for risk management, but it addresses security specifically as a separate but interrelated process. And to think of that, you have things that represent security risks that don't necessarily lead to a potential for patient harm. If you look at protected health information on, if you have software as a medical device and you need to look into the HIPAA regulations and how to protect health information, if you give out patient information, it doesn't necessarily lead to an injury. Just because you lose somebody's medical records and credit card information doesn't necessarily mean it's going to physically hurt them. But the FDA and other regulatory bodies are inherently concerned with how you're protecting that information. So it's a security risk, but not necessarily a risk of harm. Oh, and geez, getting ahead of myself. The AAMI standard is TIR 57, and it's accepted by the FDA, and it's referenced by the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. So the IMDRF references it as well, but it really is just, it parallels 14971, but specific to security versus risk.
I have a quick question. It sounds a little funny. When I was working with pacemakers, we had trouble with cell phone boosters and stuff, but that was never considered a risk because they didn't even exist when we first started it. How do you handle that kind of thing? I mean, we had problems even with those things for catching people stealing stuff,
Yeah.
RFID. If you bent over a certain way, that would affect the pacemakers, but those
Yep.
didn't exist when we first started. How do you add that in there? I just wondered, because that's a real basic risk.
That's a great question, Jan. When pacemakers were developed, we didn't have the same testing standards that we have now, or at least not the same version. So 6236, I'm sorry, 60601-1-2 is the EMC standard. And these fall under the category of emissions. So you expose the device to different radio frequencies, and you see what radio frequencies your device gives off.
But I'm talking about the things that didn't even exist.
I get that. So when the standards were developed, those didn't exist. However, the committees that are responsible for maintaining and updating those standards frequently will add these risks to the standards. So if you look at what the current standard is now, it's version 4.1. And a lot of companies are saying, well, I don't want to do testing to 4.1. Do I have to do testing to 4.1? In general, the answer is no, you don't have to do the testing to the 4.1 standard if you're already cleared by the FDA. In Europe, you're required to update your testing to the most current standard in order to maintain compliance. But in the US, they say, well, if you're a moderate or low risk device, once you have 510K clearance, you don't have to update your testing unless you make a change. You make a change, then you have to update your testing to the most current standard. And if it's a new standard, then we want you to resubmit your 510K for a device modification. So that's when you would do a special 510K or traditional if it's a lot of changes. In this particular case, they first did a change looking for the high frequency radio frequencies. They have expanded and expanded and expanded and made it tougher for companies to pass that test. And so that takes care of the high frequency stuff. The low frequency stuff, that is more in the range of the RFID scanners that you're talking about for security when you walk through Walmart or whatever, when you walk in or walk out. Those are the low frequency, and so those have been just added on 4.1. So 4.0 didn't have it, 4.1 does, and that came into effect last August or September. But they also have this new standard called an AIM standard, AIM, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but if you have a high-risk device, such as a pacemaker, the FDA expects you to comply with that standard. And because pacemakers are a PMA device instead of a 510K device, they have to update and stay current, and they have to do supplements all the time. And so that's how the FDA handles those high-risk devices. Those devices have to be updated. They have to do post-market surveillance. They have mandatory post-market surveillance reports. So when these new risk come about because they now have this new technology. The company does post-market surveillance, identifies the risk, a standard gets developed, they do testing to the new standard, but the company will come up with its own risk controls in the interim while the standard's being developed, because the standard's always a few years behind. So I am 100% confident all the pacemakers already have addressed this, have already done the testing to it. It's been added as a design input. Over time, as you get post-market surveillance, you identify a new risk, you update your design inputs, you do the testing in your design verification, and you may even have new outputs that are put out there. And this is a case where you might have to send out an advisory notice to all the people with pacemakers. Hey, by the way, these models and these particular serial numbers are not protected. And so you should be aware of that and avoid these hazardous situations. And you may even want to get your implant taken out and a new one put in to avoid these particular hazardous situations. It's, you know, risk versus reward. If I remove it from you, you got to go through surgery. If I don't remove it from you, you got to stay away from Walmart. If you're aware of the risks, you can do some of your own avoidance of hazardous situations. But that's how they address it for high risk devices. For moderate and low risk devices, the FDA's policy is if you don't make a change, we're not going to make you do any retesting.
That makes sense. The only other weird thing we had happen was somebody asked what would happen with a pacemaker when they scuba dive to 100 feet, and we just hadn't considered that. So
Yeah, it's sort of like the implants, the knee implants, and the guy says, well, what happens if I go ski racing and I fall? And we're like, I believe it's contraindicated for ski racing. I don't know if we specifically said that, but I think we said, you know, vigorous exercise with a force over this amount of weight. You know, if you weigh 200 pounds and you're flying down the mountain and hitting a bump, that's probably more than 450 pounds of force that's going on that knee. And because it's on one leg, yeah, you're going to blow that implant right out. So people that go scuba diving at 100 feet or 100 meters or whatever it's going to be, you might exceed what this is designed for. So
pacemaker, yeah, we had to tell them not to do that, but
this is why we tell people read instructions, and that's why all the male population dies prematurely. They don't know how to read instructions.
yes, I've noticed that. No.
That is a beautiful segue to our next slide.
Thank you, Matthew. So task 3, sorry, I went too far.
All right, which comes to formative usability testing. And this is, again, inherently related to design and risk management. And what we find too many times is that clients don't start looking at this until they want to get to the validation portion. So the FDA requires that your usability validation is just a part of the overall design validation for your device. And in order to get to the summative testing, which is that sort of that final pass-fail validation of your usability, you need to start with your formative testing, which is just your investigative, you're learning about the device, you're learning how the actual users might interact with the interface in a simulated environment. What it is when you take your formative testing, you use that to identify the critical tasks, the things that the users have got to do so that they can use the device correctly. They don't introduce any additional risk of harm. They can't hurt themselves with it. You use your formative testing to identify all of those areas, and that is what builds your validation test. So if you haven't done formative testing, you're not in a position where you can write a good protocol for your summative validation test. A good protocol is going to have a brief section that explains how you determined what the critical tasks for the intended safe operation of your device is. And if you can't back that up with, well, in our formative testing, we discovered, you know, these are our critical tasks and how we found them, you're not ready to roll the dice with a validation test. It's a pass-fail sort of environment. And if you fail, you've got to go back and revisit, do I need to make a design change? Do I need to just, is it isolated to just labeling and education? What is causing this particular use error with the device? And sometimes the preferred method to get rid of a risk is to engineer it away so you can't make that mistake again. And if you haven't investigated formatively those areas and you discover them during your summative test, not only did you fail your validation, now you have to go back and make a design change, revalidate all the other areas of design you've hit, and run another validation test anyway. And these are like the diet version of a clinical trial. You have to recruit participants. They have to be the intended users of your device. You have to simulate a scenario that realistically represents, at least, fairly closely, the actual environment of use for your device. And the process, it really mirrors a clinical trial. The only difference is sometimes you can have clinical trials with thousands of participants. In the United States, the FDA is looking at some tens of participants. I think the magic minimum number is 13 to 15. Somewhere in that range. Yeah, so it's basically a diet clinical trial with less people, but the processes are very, very close to identical. And it's something that you need to be prepared for because it's a high monetary risk activity to fail. You really want to pass your first time. And it's such an objective process, there's not a lot of wiggle room. Rob and I discussed that when we plan these types of tests, we like to record the entire thing. And it presents an issue sometimes. There's no subjectiveness in the final report. It's either objectively demonstratable or it isn't. And you don't want to reach the end point and find out you have to make a design change, revalidate everything, and then run another summative test. This is something you should be looking at from the concept phase of your design when you first start building your regulatory, because it affects so many other processes.
I think we got some awesome comments and questions here, Matthew, that I want to make sure we cover. So number one, there's a comment here. There's a lot of usability tests that may be composed, which add a lot of costs. And at the same time, you're in the dark as to what the actually the FDA or notified body requires. So having done hundreds of submissions on both sides, I've literally done hundreds of class 3 submissions for CE marking and hundreds of 510Ks, literally that many myself. And we are seeing a ton of FDA responses back with deficiencies on usability. And what it comes down to is the company, number one, didn't do enough work on the risk or hazard identification up front. So when you do hazard identification, it cannot be just one method. That won't cut it anymore, particularly for a complex device. There are 3 different methods that you should be using always. Always. Number one, in Annex A of 24971 2020. So that's the latest version of the risk management guidance document, 24971 2020 Annex A. It lists 37 questions. It used to be in the standard. It used to be Annex C in 14971. It's now Annex A in 24971. It now has 37 questions instead of 34 questions, but that's a starting point. It's 37 questions designed to, as a group, your risk management team, identify hazards that you might have overlooked. So that's step one. Step two, you should be reading all the guidance documents that are available, not just for your product classification, whether it's CE marking guidance documents and ISO standards, but also FDA guidance documents and standards. You should be looking at those guidance documents and standards that are relevant to your type of device because they list hazards and tell you how to address them with specific testing. And so that will help you identify hazards, number two. Number three, it is a requirement that you do a review of previous generations of your device, previous versions of your device, as well as competitor products that are already on the market to identify hazards. That is an input to your design process. So that should be occurring before you even get to feasibility testing. When you've got a proof of concept, that's when you do that stuff. And if you're wondering, well, why doesn't the notified body requirement? That's called a state-of-the-art review that nobody's doing. So when you're wondering why the notified body gave you a major nonconformity for not providing a state-of-the-art review as part of your CER, that's why it's required as an input to the design process way, way, way back at the beginning, and you left it to the very end, and you're wondering why you're missing those risks in your usability testing. So that's 3 different types of hazard identification most companies are not even doing. They're just saying, well, I think these are the risks, and so they write them down and they say they're done. Or even better is my favorite of, well, our device has no risks. That's why it requires a 510K, because there's no risk whatsoever. That's why it's a class 2B device, because there are no risks. If your device is something other than a class 1 that requires no submission, it has risks, period. There's no debate about it. Otherwise, the regulators would not waste their time. So you have to identify the risks up front, and those become design inputs, and they help you identify what needs testing and what doesn't. Number two, the formative testing also helps you identify risks that you didn't anticipate. So when a company goes all the way through the 510K process, submits their 510K, and they write a justification for why 3 failed people out of 20 is still acceptable, that all of a sudden, because you had 3 failures, is no longer summative validation. It's called formative because you failed 3 times. Those were critical tasks you identified in your usability study. They failed, and the right answer isn't to write a justification. The right answer is, oh, that became formative testing. I revised my IFU, I revised my training, I considered adding additional design controls, and I repeat my summative testing with the new modifications. And people don't want to do that. People don't like the cost. People don't like the time delay. But that's the difference between formative and summative. Formative is before you're done. Summative is after you're done implementing all the design controls, and it can't fail. If you have a failure of any one user on one of those critical tasks, you failed, and you have to go back to the beginning. Just like you failed electrical safety testing, you redesign your device and do the testing over again. Yes, it's expensive, and maybe it's tens of thousands of dollars expensive. So that's why you do the formative testing. The whole idea behind the formative testing is so you don't have $100,000 failure in summative testing. If there
That,
is no other reason for it, that's it.
that actually, again, that's another great segue.
I do want to
you-
cover this other comment that Jan had. She said,
Oh.
does this include child-resistant testing? Do you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, so you can look at that from 2 different perspectives. So something with child-resistant testing. One, are children intended users for the device? And if they are, then they absolutely need to be taken into consideration when you're designing the device. And the other part is what's the risk of harm, not just to a patient, but to an unintended user. So if you have an over-the-counter device that people are using in their own homes, it's realistic to expect that some of your intended users are going to have children. It would be considered foreseeable misuse of the device. And that is something that you would need to seriously consider as a risk mitigation, because it's not unheard of. It's happened before. Children have hurt themselves with things that they weren't intended to use just altogether. It's foreseeable misuse of your device. So it is something that you would need to address.
Yeah, that's a big thing for combination products that I work with.
Yeah, they even have a standard for the resistant packaging, correct?
Oh yeah, it's written right in the law, actually.
Yeah, so between the law and the standard, I mean, it sounds like it's a leverageable risk mitigation. That, okay, well, we have an over-the-counter product, so we have to expect that some of these users are going to have children or grandchildren in the home. We followed the law or the guidance in this manner, and this is how we proactively mitigated that particular thing.
I'm going to put a note also in the chat for everybody of another example of foreseeable misuse, but I'll let Matthew go on to software validation.
Perfect. So the reason this was a good
one question before we do.
Oh.
Yeah, I was kind of waiting for a place to get in. I'd asked a question earlier, and I think you partially, and I decided I'd just listen to see if you answered it, and you partially did, and brought up another one. The question I had is that as a design consultant, and I used to experience this too when just working within a company, as a designer or as in some other engineering position. One question I had was that given that they're going to want to be concentrating on design, is there a series of useful questions to copy to management to assure, and saying things like, I'd like to assure this happens or prevent that from happening. And the partial answer that I got from just listening was, maybe I could ask, when I come aboard on a medical device design, is there an existing risk management and quality plan so that I can make sure any usability and risk concerns are addressed in the proper timing, scope, and context? And then and this is how far I got, if they don't have something like this, is there something that I can quickly, if that's a good answer to the question, is there something I can quickly send them to describe this, and then maybe something longer so they could do their own evaluation on if they have it. And then if they needed something longer, I think I would just give them your phone number. But the answer was, what I was trying to do is find ways to make sure that conversation is at least bookmarked, that conversation is open. Is there an existing risk management and quality plan so I can make sure that any usability and risk concerns are addressed in the proper timing, scope, and context. Is that a good way to open that conversation, or can you think of some better ways?
In the interest of time, I think that's a longer answer. What do you think
Okay.
about, Matthew? We do a short little recording and slap it up on YouTube and then provide a link.
I love that idea.
Okay.
Yeah, as long as Rick's on board, he's spoken to us before. I'd love a chance to collaborate again.
Yeah, we can do a short video on that and record it and put it up on YouTube, and then we'll provide the link in Slack.
That'd be good. Because
Okay.
I'd like to know, I'd like the best answer to that myself.
Yeah.
Not having it is kind of leaving leaving yourself open to working in a vacuum and not being able to make sure that the people for whom you're doing work are adequately covered.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, so we had another very quick usability question pop up that I can answer pretty quickly about usability verification being applicable for the FDA and not specifically validation. What they look for is, as part of design validation, this is just an individual element that you have to validate for the design of the device. You can't just verify that you did your elements of usability in human factors engineering. You still need the final validation test. So you can't separate the two when your final end goal is a 510K and moving your device to the market. Because if you read, the FDA has a 2016 guidance document on usability. They specifically lay out in the guidance that this is just a single element of overall design validation. Okay, on to software validation. So this is only going to be applicable if you have a software product or something that incorporates software, firmware, some sort of electronic. In the interest of time, some of the big key points for this particular area is that you need to make sure you complete it at the appropriate time in your overall project. And one of the big points is you should validate your software before you do your safety testing for your electromedical devices. You don't want to run your IEC testing before you validated the software that's used in your device. And it's the same reason you want to do your formative testing before your summative testing. It's because if you fail your final validation, you have to go back, redo a lot of work, and then you still have to try to validate the design again. And it's something that it's an easily foreseeable area that happens all too often as clients get ahead of themselves and they want to just jump right into the IEC stuff because it's a very visual, blatant bullet point and a hurdle you have to jump over. Sometimes the software validation portion gets overlooked, and you want to do that before you do your IEC testing. You could probably even, if you don't have any additional comments, Rob, we could move on to the next one.
Okay.
Supplier qualification. So this is what wraps into really your quality system, and this is my segue for bringing us back on task with quality specifically. In order to qualify a supplier, you have to have a quality system. You have to have a process control in place for how you're qualifying your supplier. How are you maintaining your approved suppliers list? Anyone that's doing anything that could affect the quality of the device needs to be approved before they touch anything to do with that device. And I don't want to put Rick in the spotlight, but he's just a great example, and I think he'll let me pick on him for a second. I audited a mutual client one time that had utilized design services. Did a great job with design, everything was fine, but didn't realize that the subcontractors and consultants, people who are performing the work at this level, are suppliers. You have suppliers even if they don't give you a physical item. If they're supplying a service that affects quality, they need to be approved, they need to be evaluated, they need to be on your approved suppliers list. So Rick did an amazing job. The client dropped the ball with their quality system documentation. So that it was, that this expert did this for my design. And I said, great, can you show me your supplier qualification for that expert? And they were unable to. Not that Rick did anything wrong, his job was amazing. It was the client dropped the ball with implementation of their quality system during the design of their device. So supplier qualification includes all the consultants, everyone who's supplying a service, not just a tangible item. And it's a good talking point because it's not something everybody inherently grasps at first. When you think a supplier, they're giving me something. Usually I'm ordering components of my device from this molding facility, and then I'm buying electrical components from this facility, and of course they're suppliers. But also the regulatory person who's assembling your 510K submission, they're also a supplier, and they're also something that'll get looked at when you get audited. And all of these
I've got a
processes
question
are
when you're
controlled
moving
within
through
your,
there.
yep, absolutely. All these processes are controlled through your quality system. So when you go through design, there's elements of design control. You need a procedure, you need the process control, and your quality system is what provides the documentation of compliance with that area. There's a couple of bigger questions there. Let me see what the next slide is.
Oh, can I ask you a question just on that one point?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so would the best way to, when I'm starting work for, I've only had maybe 1 out of 7, more or less, clients who have been on, who I would call sophisticated from a scientific or engineering area, and even more importantly, from a procedural and regulatory area. So might a good question to ask them, the other 6, be, just so you know, if you already have a quality system developed, you should probably put anyone giving you IP services, such as me or anyone else you got, on your supplier list. I'm trying to think of the most diplomatic way to do that and not just look like I'm hurling obstacles before them.
The way I handle it from an auditing perspective is when my initial communication for a confirmed audit, it's okay, I'm the assigned auditor, this is who I'm talking to, these are the dates we're looking at, and I provide an agenda. I always attach at the very end a copy of my resume, some of the more valid certificates, and I avoid the question altogether. I just proactively say, here is my qualifications for supplier qualification.
Oh, that's great.
I put the ball right in their court. And what it is it's their responsibility to do their due diligence. It's just like when I audit a company, I have before asked, can I take a look at your approved suppliers list? And the first thing I look for is, okay, I am a supplier providing a service that affects the quality of the device. Can you show me on your approved suppliers list where Medical Device Academy is? And it's happened before where the client goes, oh, that counts? Yes, it does count.
So if I say that to them, they may ask me that same question and they'll go, oh, really? And I go, yeah, they're going to ask you that at some point in time. So I thought I'd just send this to you.
Perfect. That's how I sidestep the issue altogether. I just hand it right over, and we have a file where all of our auditors have a resume and copies of their auditing certificate for the elite auditor. We hand it straight to the client. Say, here, here's my qualification. Here's the documentation records to prove it. Put those in your files. Somebody asked about validating a supplier who's providing a service. When you take a risk-based approach to it, you just have to look with what do I need from them to competently perform their job duties. And if you look at auditing, if you're going to validate an auditor, they should be able to provide you a record of their training to be a lead auditor. If they're going to have them do a special audit like a technical file, or if they're going to do a mock MDSAP audit, you should have records of their training on those topics. So if you're going to evaluate a supplier of a service instead of a tangible item, you need to look for how could you demonstrate to a future auditor whoever was doing that work was competent to do so. And the higher the risk work they're doing, the more documentation you want to back that up.
And you need to look on the blacklist for the FDA.
Yes. Yeah, you don't want to overkill documentation and then find out that it was somebody who just flat out don't use this person ever. Labeling and IFU requirement specification. So there's individual standards for what you have to include in labeling. There's requirements for what infographics, I think is the term they're using. If you're going to put pictures in your IFU, what can you use to represent a warning or a contraindication? You need to make sure that you're using things that are accepted by the governing body you're submitting to. But this is going to directly tie back into your usability again. So when you get into labeling and you get into instructions for use and you get into marketing materials and what you put on your website, it's all things that your intended user can use to get information on how they're supposed to interact with your device. So there's separate standards. You have to validate your labeling. You have to approve it. You have to make sure that whoever's applying the labeling is a supplier if you're not doing it internally. But it's also really the first point of contact for human factors engineering on your device itself. The intended user is going to get the package or the box or however you're delivering your device. The first thing they're going to see is your labeling, any pictures you have on the box. They're going to open it up. Any quick start guides or IFUs in there, that is your sort of first line defense for usability for your device. And it's something that you want to be developing as you develop your device. And anytime you make a design change, you need to be aware that it may affect instructions you've already included. So if you fail your summative validation test because users had difficulty turning your device off, and you decide that you're going to change the colors of the off button, so it's very clear, green means on, red means off. You add visual labeling to it. You put the words on and off right on the buttons. You need to go back and make sure that your labeling and your instructions for use are updated to include those particular design changes. It doesn't help if the client is looking, or the user, not so much the client, but if I'm using a device and I look at the instructions and it's got pictures of 3 previous iterations of the device, it might not necessarily even be relevant anymore to what's in front of me and in my hand. So if I can't figure out the on-off button because they're not labeled and they're not color-coded, but pictures on the labeling say they are, it's going to make it harder for me to use the device and increases the chance of me having a use error that could result in harm.
I have a question for the audience to test your knowledge. For those software developers out there that you know the answer, you're welcome to chime in. What does the 3 horizontal lines on top of one another mean on a website or an app? Does anybody know the answer? Oh, we got an answer.
The hamburger, that's awesome.
It's the menu. So awesome. So here, I know a CEO, his name's Rob Packard, and he hired a website development firm to develop his website. And the firm insisted that he needed a hamburger stack, and Rob Packard didn't have a clue what a hamburger stack was, and said, when did this come about, and who thought this was a great idea? And does anybody actually use this? And 6 months later, I can't find a site without a hamburger stack. So for those of you that don't know what a symbol is, it might just mean that you're old and out of the loop. It might mean the technology is specific to a certain field. Like if you're developing a monopolar electric cautery device, the one button is yellow, one button is blue. One button always has to be closer to the tip than the other. And that is actually in a standard, and it's been done that way for 100 years. So you don't have options. It's built right into the law or the standard. You shall do it this way. But for website interfaces, and now we're offering a lot of web-based software as a medical device, if you don't know what a hamburger stack is, maybe you need to really study user interfaces a little bit more when you're developing your website. I can get away with it to a certain extent because I'm running a company and it's a website for our services. But if you're developing the user interface for a device, you're going to have to be a little bit more savvy than me.
And it's definitely foreseeable complications with the use of the device. If you have a technological device that requires interaction with your software like that, how can you foresee elements of your intended user group that may struggle with that?
Should I go on to the next slide, Matthew?
Yes. And that I'll spoon feed the answer to that one. You discover that during your formative testing. You put your device in the hands of intended users, and you find out what problem areas they have. You can brainstorm in an office all you want. Sometimes the best feedback is just put your device in the hands of people who are going to. So they'll tell you the problem.
I know Matthew had something planned for this slide, but I think with Jan being on the on the bar as a panelist, I think it would be a huge missed opportunity to not let her comment however she would like on the topic of packaging specifications and why you need to do that in parallel with your 510K development.
Well,
Yeah,
even if you have an IFU, I'd rather see what Matthew has to say, and then I can say more.
oh,
You've been set up.
This is perfect. We can pull the crowd. And the best part is this is the last technically heavy bullet point for today's presentation. So if we wrap up this portion, the rest of it's a slam dunk. Packaging specifications, you need to look at quite a few different things, because it's more than just how are you going to stuff your device in a box and sell it to consumers. Do you have a device that you have to protect? You know, is it something that is temperature sensitive? Do I have components of my device that can't be frozen or can't be in hot temperatures for a long time? Do I have a device that I really need to keep out of the hands of children? Do I have to have packaging that's specifically child safe? Do I have to have, well, from a design perspective, do I need to validate my packaging? Do I have any testing I need to do? When you're designing your device, you also have to consider, is the FDA going to require me to do a drop test? What kind of packaging am I going to have when I do that test? How much is it going to cost me to source this from a supplier? What packaging specifications do I have? Am I going to price myself out of bringing a device to the market because I can't afford to put it in the packaging it needs to be in? Does my packaging have to maintain the sterility of a device? How do I test that? What information do I need to give the FDA to prove that, yeah, once it's repackaged from the sterilizer, it's going to maintain that sterile state before it gets to the end user? It's something that needs to be done while you're designing your device. You don't want to hit the end of the design of your device and realize that, oh, yeah, I have to have an IFU. I have to have packaging. I have to demonstrate that I validated my packaging. It's done drop testing. I maintain the sterility of it. Do I need to make sure that my package will protect the device for an extended period of time? Now, do my packages fail after 3 months of sitting in a warehouse? So I hope I covered some of the very broad bullet points, and we can let the technical expert take over. But yeah, those are packaging specification considerations you should be doing while you're building your 510K. Don't wait until you want to submit and then find out you have to go back.
Yeah, you hit all the points. It was spread out more than I would have done, but yeah, and the only thing I saw was on your suppliers have to be approved, and they have to be able to actually supply the product or the packaging that you need. And if they don't, and you have to go somewhere else, how long does it take the quality system to do it? And one of my biggest headaches is getting an IFU in the size that we actually need to validate with our shock and vibration work that has to be done for shipping stability. And it's fun getting all those pieces pulled together.
And I'm sure you can testify that if you reach the end stage and have to redo it and scramble, some of these areas push projects back weeks or months.
A couple of years in some places.
It's a long time to float investors by when you add project delays like that. A lot of these startup companies really are banking on hitting the market as soon as they can for viability of a business. And when you throw a delay in like that, sometimes that's what sinks the entire ship.
Right, and they will come up with, sometimes they'll come up with packaging that costs 3 or 4 times more than what it needed to, because they didn't have somebody in the beginning to try and work with them through the design system. I've had issues where we've had to redesign the product because it couldn't pass the distribution testing. And that can cause fun things to happen too.
I've even seen companies that started in the sterilization validation, found out the packaging was too long to fit in the chamber for EO sterilization, had to redesign the packaging, and so they had already gone through the sterilization validation queue once, and that took longer than expected. The second time through, it was 14 weeks. So they spent almost 9 months trying to get through sterilization validation, and on their timeline, they said 4 weeks. So 4 weeks versus 9 months, there was a small upset in management, and somebody might have been on the chopping block.
Yeah, that was, I was with some,
got you through it.
yeah. I was on I was in working with a skunk work once, small group, and they had a 68-inch long unit they wanted to lay flat on 48-inch pallets for sterilization. That didn't work too well.
Yeah, it's a real bummer when you find that out and you've already got 1,000 units in your stock warehouse and you have to completely redesign and reorder.
Yeah, we had fun. We tried to stick them into, or wanted to put them in gamma sterilization, but found out one of the plastics would change into hydrochloric acid when it got hit with the gamma. So that didn't work too well.
Yikes. All right. That's great. I love it. Can you hit the next slide, Rob?
Before I do that, there was a comment here by, I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Loic. He says that writing the IFU before designing is an excellent approach. It'll force you to think your intended use really through. So this came up as a question yesterday from a client. Their comment was that with the MDR, now they have to put intended purpose into all their IFUs, and that means rewriting all of their IFUs for Europe. And they will no longer be able to have an IFU for Europe and the US. So let me, I haven't had a chance to, okay, thank you, Luke, for helping with the pronunciation. The European regulations now actually defines in the definitions of the MDR what intended purpose is. It's indications for use of the device, intended users of the device, intended patient population of the device, and intended environment of use of the device. So it's all 4 of those things, not 1. So they're not asking you to replace the words indications for use or intended use with intended purpose. What they're doing is saying intended purpose of the device includes not just the indications, which you've already got in your IFU to satisfy the FDA, but it also includes these other things that are in your device description that is required by the FDA. Because if you ever have submitted a device description that didn't include the intended patient population, the intended users in the intended use environment, you've gotten a deficiency. I need more detail in your device description. So we just need to do a little bit of training and write a work instruction for the company, but it's, you need to make sure that your device description includes those other 3 things, not just the indications for use. And yes, there's always been a debate over, is this intended use or is this indications for use? Intended use is high level, indications for use is more specific, and that hasn't changed. And a lot of people say this is both, and that could be, but usually what they mean is this is my indication for use. But intended purpose is not something you need to change all your labeling to say now. You still keep it as indication for use, but somewhere in that instruction for use, the Europeans want the other things, and that's not something the FDA is requiring, but they're definitely not against it. They want it in your device description, the detailed one that you provide the FDA, and they would certainly like it to match word for word in your instruction for use. And so if you have the exact same wording, a general device description, the name of your device, the list of the different devices, the in use environment, the intended users, and the patient population. That's basically the first page or page and a half of our device description. If you pop that in word for word into your instruction for use, you're going to meet that entire requirement for intended purpose of the device in the EU. And that's what the FDA is looking for also. So it shouldn't mean any change. It's clarification and updating your IFUs to meet the requirements, but it's not a change in claims. It's not a new indication. It's updating your instruction for use to be more clear of things you've already said before. You should just be able to copy and paste and add it in. And yeah, you notify them of a change, but it's not a significant change because you're just copying things that are already in your technical file and putting them in your IFU because the regulations say so. And the FDA won't have any problem with it either because you're clarifying something that was already in your 510K device description. So no need to worry, if this is going to be considered significant. This is not significant. It's a minor clarification using existing claims and documentation you already have. And Matthew says we're way over. So slide 8 or task 8.
Task 8. Perfect. So we've talked about, this is all inherent to the quality system, separate from your regulatory submission. So we're picking on 510Ks, most strongly, but It applies to de novos, it applies to CE marking, it applies to Canadian licensing. Just each of those governing bodies have a slightly different rule set you have to follow. All of them require a quality system. So if you're going to have a device on the market being sold, you need to regulate the quality of the device. And every process we've talked about needs to be controlled through your quality management system. So when you have design controls, you should have a design control procedure within your quality system that explains how you're going to design your device. What records are the design of that device going to produce? Who is in charge of that? When you look at a process control, which is really a quality system is a collection of process control. So if you look at any of the elements we've talked about, if I were to audit it, the first thing I'm going to ask for is either, hey, can you show me in your quality manual what procedure controls this process? Or I'll just flat out ask, hey, what procedure are you using to control this? And in order to have those procedures, Rob sells a turnkey quality system that has a lot of boilerplate already included that you do need to customize to your individual operation. But the process of implementing the system is more than replacing Rob's logo with your logo. If you're going to introduce a process control, you're going to have a procedure. That procedure needs to be reviewed for adequacy, make sure it meets the regulatory requirements. It needs to be approved by approving bodies within your organization. You have to evaluate whether or not this process requires me to train my employees on it. How am I going to document that my employees have been trained and competent on the process before they start executing the process? And you can start doing that essentially as you start designing your device. Now, design controls are one of the first procedures your quality system should have. To predate design controls, your first two should be document control and record control, because those process controls are documents, they're procedures. They produce records. So those are usually the first two procedures I tell people to look for. How are you controlling your documents and how are you controlling your record? And every subsequent process is just another procedure that controls a different area of your quality system. And you can drag this out. Sometimes it can take 6 months or more to fully implement a quality system for a device you're going to market and sell. You can cut some of that time off if you buy a turnkey system or you have somebody write the procedures for you. You don't have to do it all yourself, but if you have an EQMS process and you pay somebody to write your procedures and they help you implement it, it can still take 6 months and be a $10,000 bill. So it's something to look at basically as you start designing your device. It's not something you want to submit a 510K and then go, oh, geez, I better get a quality system real quick. Generally, the review of your submission is going to happen faster than you can fully, properly implement a system, which is why you should be doing it while you're building your submission.
And make sure you include packaging in that.
Packaging absolutely is its own process that should be controlled.
Which a lot of people forget.
Yes,
It's an area that I have utilized in audits before because of that very problem right there. It's an overlooked area, and I find it during audits that it's overlooked more frequently than it should.
Yep.
You don't have any other notes, we can hit the next slide, Rob.
Okay.
So we've touched on this a whole bunch of times, and we can go through this one pretty quickly. When you have usability testing, you have formative testing, which is your research and your investigation of your device. And then you have summative testing, which is validation, and it's pass-fail. There's not really a lot of wiggle room with it. You have standards that you can use. The FDA has a guidance document for how to do it. And the real bullet points of your summative or your validation testing is one, this should happen after you've hit design freeze. You don't want to try to validate your device before you've frozen your design. So if you're not in the freeze phase of your design process, it's too early to be validating the design. If you do, you're crossing your fingers that there's no changes made whatsoever before you freeze it. Because as soon as you start making additional changes post-validation, you now have an iteration of your device that is not fully validated. And you're going to have to go back and repeat all your testing again. The other point to make is if you're doing a submission for the FDA, one of the benefits of they have a guidance document for usability. It was issued in 2016. If you go into the appendix, they provide the format and content of what they want you to give them in your usability report. So they have pre-built what you give them. You just have to conduct your test and fill it in. They provide a table of contents. They provide what sections they want you to talk about, and you take their template and just give it back to them. And it's right in their usability guidance, and it's publicly available. You just download it. You cut and paste your report from the FDA's own guidance.
Right, and that's again where a lot of people forget it's supposed to have the packaging included in the summative testing.
It
Yeah,
absolutely is.
And maintenance and cleaning and you name it.
Yes,
Yeah.
All
yes.
the things that we like to forget about. I'll worry about that later.
No.
Perfect. And the FDA says specifically this is just a portion of overall design validation. But when you look at other governing bodies and requirements for what they look at in human factors engineering, they include more than the IFU. The instructions for use get the most attention, but when you look at what they call information related to safety, it's everything that the user can interact with, which is the packaging. It's what pictures you're putting on the outside of the box. It's your labeling. It even includes information you have on your website, but it's not just the IFU, and it's an area where packaging gets overlooked again, but it is a critical element of it.
And good luck. So what I have seen a lot of companies do is they will take a competitor's IFU, they'll slap their name on it, substitute a couple of pictures so it's their product instead of the competitor's product, and say it's done because the instructions for use are equivalent to the competitor's product. So when you try to answer these questions about where's your use related risk analysis, where's your critical task list, what formative testing did you do, and where's your protocol for usability testing? Good luck. I can't answer any of those questions for you because now we got to tell the FDA, well, we just copied the competitor's IFU. We didn't put any real thought into it, swapped out the name, swapped in some pictures, and we're done. Isn't that how it's done? No, that's not how it's done. That's how you get around doing work. Take us to slide 10.
All right. So as we get into things that often get overlooked, this is a process for a specific type of regulatory submission. It's not free. You have to pay for them to look over your stuff. And if they say no, you get to pay for it again. One of the things, because we look specifically at startups mostly, or smaller level medical device manufacturers, is if you qualify, apply for small business status before you clear your 510K. The cost savings is tremendous. And when you look at investors and time to market, the cost savings sometimes is a make or break factor in the viability of the business overall. Rob, you can probably go into much better detail for why this is such a key thing. But if you qualify for it, apply for it. You don't get it by default, but the cost savings is tremendous.
So in every proposal we send out for a 510K, we actually put this in the proposal where we say, here's the standard fee, here's the small business fee, and you have to apply ahead of time. We even say it takes 60 days. We provide a copy of the guidance. We provide a copy of the two forms, the one for a domestic company and the one for a company outside the US. We even offer videos. We explain the process. We remind the company of it, and still 80% of our clients forget to do this. I have no idea why, but if somebody could look at this from what am I missing? But I put it in the proposal that you sign. I give you training on it. I give you the guidance. I give you the forms, and I remind you multiple times. You know, you're worried about the $13,100 that you're paying me to prepare your 510K, but you seem to not care about the $9,000 extra that you paid the FDA. I don't get it. Please explain it to me. Now, things that we have seen that where companies legitimately meant to get the small business status, applied for the small business status, it did not get the status. These are the things I'm going to share with you that I think are much more helpful. But if somebody has an idea on how to beat this into clients' heads of, save $9,000, let me know. But here's the things that happen. Number one, company is a startup company, does not have any revenues, doesn't file taxes, can't apply for small business status. So you have to file taxes in order to apply. If you don't file for taxes, you can't apply. If you have a loss, you can still file taxes for a loss and carry that over to future years when you actually have revenues. So that's one reason why you might file taxes when you don't have to. Another reason is so you can get tax credits from the U.S. government to apply against your payroll taxes. But that's just another reason why to file taxes. Another reason why we see this happen is they don't realize they have to apply every year. We applied once, the project took longer than we thought. It went into past October 1st of this year, and they didn't realize the fiscal year for the FDA begins on October 1st. So they're into a new fiscal year. So you have to reapply every year on August 1st. So remember that August 1st is coming up. You need to apply. The next thing I have seen is companies fill out the form incorrectly. So read carefully, ask questions if you're not sure on how to fill it out. I think I've seen every single way you can screw up that form, but people are creative on how to fill out government forms and make mistakes or get careless or don't read instructions. And not all of it's intuitive. It's a government form. So I agree it's not well designed. If you are a foreign firm, so you're outside the US, it gets even tougher because now you have two sides of the form you have to fill in. And some people get confused. Am I filling it out as the US subsidiary, or am I filling it out as the foreign subsidiary, or the roles could be reversed? Another thing that they've run into trouble with is I don't know who to send this to, because as a foreign firm, you write in the tax information instead of attaching your tax return because it's probably in a different language. And then you have the National Tax Authority verify the accuracy of those numbers. Well, interestingly enough, I've never had a problem with any of the European countries because they all require English in secondary school. But Mexico, they don't want to sign this form because they don't speak English very well, and it's not in Spanish, it's in English. So they're like, well, do you have a Spanish version? No, we don't. The FDA only provides an English version, and they will only accept an English version. So you have to translate it for them and convince them to sign it. So you might have a problem in Mexico. Japan, outright refusal, will not sign. So there are certain countries where you're going to find it's more challenging to get this form substantiated by the National Tax Authority, and therefore you can't submit it to the FDA, so you're stuck. So you should know this and plan this, figure out this early. There might be a way around that you can find by talking with other companies in your country to help fill out that paperwork. But when you're all done and you get it stamped by the National Tax Authority, you cannot snap a picture and send it to me. You have to send the original that's been signed and stamped by the National Tax Authority to the FDA as a FedEx. I would recommend scanning and taking a picture for yourself when the FDA says they've lost it, because I've had that happen. But you want to make sure that you send them the original, because they will say we require an original. You only have a leg to stand on if you can prove that they lost it and you have a tracking number. So those are some of the things that I've seen, but we don't have enough time to cover every mistake that I've seen out there, but that covers most of them. And oh, by the way, they will probably update the form this year or next year. So always be on the lookout for, do they update the guidance or update the form, and make sure you're using the most current version. So I see something in the chat here. We should really break each of these bullets into their own training. Yes, that is exactly the plan, Matthew. You just created 10 new webinars. And we would like to invite Jan whenever she would like to promote her business and tell all our clients about packaging, if you're interested.
Oh, I would love to, anytime. I actually
Okay.
teach classes in it too, so.
Okay, maybe we can get some clients to pay for it. Send you the money.
That would be nice too.
Okay, so let's do that. We'll make it a paid session, and we'll make it really value added, and people will have to pay for it, because they should. You really provide value.
Oh, thank you. There is another packaging engineer that I work with on the call too, but I'm trying to get her to join MDG, so she's not an actual member yet.
Okay.
But she's a good source too. We work together.
There was a person on the phone here. They left a note that I think is helpful. I had mentioned you can file taxes for a loss. His comment was you have to establish basis for the loss, particularly partnerships and LLCs. So, yeah, you're going to need a little help from your accountant if you want to save this $9,000 and you have no income. So you definitely need to work on that, but it's worth the time and effort if you're not only doing it for the $9,000 deduction, but you're also doing it for tax credits. if you can't get this, another option would be to go to a third-party review. So a lot of products can do third-party reviews, but please, please, please be careful about who you select as a third-party reviewer. Just because it's on the FDA website does not mean they should be used. The FDA would love to get out of reviewing these and have more third-party reviewers, but there is only one third-party reviewer that has any kind of significant experience getting 510Ks cleared, and that's RTS out in Minneapolis. So I believe it's rts3pro.com, and right on the homepage it says, we've done over 1,000 submissions. We review them in 10 to 14 days, and there's an online application form where they give you a quote. And they actually deliver in the time they say they are. And when you go to one of their competitors that's also on that list, one of them, I just had a client decide they were definitely going to use that one and not follow my advice. Well, that third-party reviewer had experience of one. They've only got him one 510K cleared in their entire career, and they are a third-party reviewer. So this is the threshold, one. So when they have less experience than you do, don't hire them. That goes back to supplier quality slide.
Hey, Rob, just to interject again, you're going to share the slide deck on the Slack channel. Is that how it's getting out?
Yes, I'm going to share the slide deck on the Slack channel, so people will be able to download it there. It's going to be the PDF of it, and this infographic is one of the slides. So this is the next slide, but it shows you all 10 steps in the order that we presented them. But you'll have a PDF that you can download there. I haven't looked at what the PDF size is. Maybe it's bigger, maybe it's smaller. I'm hoping it's smaller.
Yeah. And looking back, I'm so happy we gave packaging its own little honeycomb.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, you came up with the list, like way we ought to do this, and we went through the list and we actually wrote a blog on it. So I'll include a link for the blog as well, where you get some more information. But I would love to have every single one of these be a webinar that we do. I know we've already done one for quality systems. I know we've done one for summative. I think we get some great input here on why we need to do it for formative, and so maybe we'll have Rick help us with a formative usability testing one. And I think we definitely want to have Jen back for one on packaging, and we've done one on software. We've done one on supplier quality. We've done multiple ones on design and risk management planning. So, and we've done one on labeling and IFU, but that needs to be updated. I need to
And I
update the
bet
small
you
business one.
only did it on the aspects of the graphics and text that's required, not on the paper, not on the packaging aspects of
Yeah.
labeling and IFUs.
And I didn't cover, I have a procedure on translation, but I didn't cover that either. So there's so much that I didn't put in the labeling and IFU one. So when I redo that, I might have to have it a multi-part session. I don't think I can cover everything in an hour and a half. So that actually, one of the things we're doing is we bought LearnDash as a plugin for WordPress. So we're going to have courses that are based on working on the LearnDash platform. So we're going to actually have certification and quizzes and multiple videos, and you can track your progress as you go along. And so that'll be a much better user interface for the training modules that we offer. And so I think maybe that should get added to the list and maybe prioritize this. Just do one on labeling and IFUs as a training module where you get certification and lots of quizzes, because there's so much to cover.
Rainey's had a really good comment about needing a psychological, emotional aspect of training for clients, which I thought was a good idea. We could all use some help on that.
Yeah, and I put my comment was that I think Michelle Lott would like to train everybody on that, or hire, or she's already got the trainer in house, and they'll be happy to offer that, because that's part of her tagline is emotional support for everybody.
Oh yeah, the regulatory stuff can get really weird.
Yeah, for years I heard, regulatory is the anti-sales group, but I like to position it as, we all have the same data. We have benchtop testing, animal testing, clinical testing, usability testing. It's to show how the product is exactly the same as some other product on the market. And then the marketing people take the same set of data and show how it's totally different than everything on the market and why you need to buy our version. And so if you wonder, we're responsible for approving the regulatory content, but we're also supposed to approve the marketing documents. If you're wondering if we have to flip a coin, yes, we have to. This is definitely in the gray area. Do we have to flip the coin? And some people they take the approach of no, and that's why they become the anti-sales group. Some people really need to embrace the concept of my job is to figure out how we can do this, not just tell people no, you can't. That's not the way to do it. Yes, we can do that. Here's how we can do that is the right answer. So if you're a regulatory person in your company and you have people putting you the anti-sales group t-shirts and giving them to you as presents, this is the approach you need to take, is just change the delivery of your message. It's not that you can't do that, it's just you can't do it that way. Let's do it a slightly different way, be creative out of the box here and figure out how we can say what you want to say and not have the FDA send us a cease and desist letter.
Rob, we have another comment in the Q&A section that I think is really great. Somebody had stated that their biggest struggle is getting clients to understand that when they have consultants in the organization or filling a role, they require training. And that's an A+ comment, because it is so true and so overlooked.
So what are you doing right now?
One of my projects is the interim director of quality and regulatory for a software as a medical device company. And one of the very first things that they're doing is, as an interim consulting position, they're slamming me through onboarding just like I was a full hire. And when you look at your training and competency requirements, and you look at your organizational chart, it's going to correlate to positions. And those positions are filled by people that have to meet certain competency requirements. So if you have a consultant doing something that's on your org chart that correlates with, I need a principal investigator and they have to be a doctor, well, you should be documenting the training of that person. But if you're having them do something that's in your quality system, it should be being done in accordance with your process control. So you should train your consultant on your procedure to how to do it your way. It absolutely is true. We have another question regarding, I'm not sure if it's referring to the EQMS systems, but somebody asked if we had any names for other products systems. I think that is in relation to the EQMS we were talking about earlier, but whoever asked the question, feel free to correct me.
Yes, EQMS.
Rob, you've worked with, we've been through quite a few of them. Is there some off the top of your head you can give us?
There actually is one called EQMS that's been around a really long time. I think just about everybody probably knows Master Control as well. For years, I have been saying the same thing. I've been saying, wait 6 months and there'll be one that comes out with more functionality and lower cost. And I've never been wrong. So yeah, the market's only so big. There are only so many medical device companies out there that you can sell to, and they all need an electronic quality system eventually. And the ones that fascinate me are the software development companies that have software as a medical device and are asking me for advice on what kind of EQMS system I should develop or use. And I say, well, if you're smart enough to develop software as a medical device, you're smart enough to develop your own electronic QMS system. And the validation requirements are in ISO TR 80002-2. And they give examples in the back. And we have a procedure for it if you want to buy it. It's only $299. And the standard's even cheaper than that. So you can do this. If your company can get a product to market that's software, you can develop a quality system in-house that's electronic and validate it. You may not want to because you don't have the time or the resources, but you can. You physically have the know-how to do this. It's not that hard. And I remember it was the day after ISO 1345-2016 was released, because it had been released at like midnight or something, and I was sitting in a McDonald's parking lot updating my slides for training that day. So I'm giving the training to this large corporate audience of like 80 people, And they asked me like, well, we need an electronic QMS system and we're thinking about this. What do you think? And they're one of those companies that has embedded software in a high risk device. And they're asking this question. And I'm like, well, why don't you have an electronic quality system yet is my first question, because how can you even consider developing a high risk device with software and hardware and not have that? Because you have to update it for Europe and the US and every single standard and all this testing. Like, that's so much work to not have it electronic and automated. That's crazy. And like, that was number one. It was more of a rhetorical question. And then I was like, who here in the room thinks that they ought to do a homegrown system on Microsoft Access? I'm like, nobody raised their hand. I'm like, who would like to use something other than Microsoft Access? Everybody's hand went up like, yes, we don't like Microsoft Access. I was like, okay, so at least you know enough not to use a Microsoft product for this. You know, you have freeware out there, you have open source software out there that you could use. You're developers, you're smart enough to do this. Just do it. Just pick a database system out there that's open source and validate it, and you're done. That's the cheapest solution, and it will meet all your needs because you built it yourself. So any other solution is going to cost you money. And so I go back to my original statement, wait 6 months and then somebody will offer something with more features that cost less. So either develop yourself or make the decision and pick the best that's available at that time. And don't do what other companies do, like, oh, we have a new quality manager, so we're going to implement a new quality system that's electronic because we have a new quality manager. You don't need to update your electronic quality system because you have a new quality manager. That's not necessary. It's not a good use of money. It's just like you have a new marketing VP, so we need to redo all the logo and brochures because we have a new VP of marketing. That doesn't make any sense either.
All
You
right.
know, if you're Coca-Cola, it takes you 10 years to add a line that's a different color. That's logo development under control. So electronic quality systems, when you need an electronic quality system and you're not going to develop it in-house, do a thorough supplier evaluation, pick wisely, and then live with your decision. Don't complain about what it has, what it doesn't have. You know, this one's cheaper. Shouldn't we switch? Just stop. Whatever it is, just make the most of that system out there and resist the urge to change to the new thing, because there's always something that's cheaper and faster and better in the world of software. Always.
Rob, we have a couple more things in the chat to address. Somebody had asked about step number 4, which is software validation. Just sort of to recap, the important bullet point with that one is to validate your software prior to your electrical safety test. Make sure that you're doing testing on a validated software, how it's incorporated within your device. Don't find out that you've paid for all of your electrical testing and then find out that you can't pass the validation for your software and have to go back and redo it.
Yeah, and in general, if you're going to do electrical safety testing, they do a checklist review of your documentation for software. They're not doing a thorough 62304 audit. So it's, do you have software hazards? Do you have cybersecurity addressed? You know, do you have software requirement specs? Do you have software design specs? Did you do unit testing? It's more of a yes or no kind of question, not I'm going to go in detail on this and grill you on it. So what I often see, I've actually seen the checklist filled in by the safety testing lab, and they say yes, 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 and they might even reference the document numbers, and that's about all I see. And based on how much time they put into it, it's not a thorough review. But you can't go into that with nothing. You could be still debugging your software. You could still be making changes to your software. So you need to show them the version that is in your safety testing lab. This is the version that we're presenting the software validation for, but we're still doing ongoing software development and making changes and fixing bugs. And that's okay. When you do your FDA submission, you got to explain this is the final version and we've eliminated all bugs and here's the version history. But for the safety testing lab, the version that they tested is what you're trying to show some validation of.
Perfect. And not to completely switch gears, but we have another question regarding the link to the Slack channel. So if you could just describe where people can access that.
So if you go to the medical devices group, is it .net? Anybody remember? Is it medical devices group, devices being plural, group.net, I believe is the link. I think I actually have it on our contact us page because Joe asked me to put it there, so I put it there. But if you click on the link, okay, so mdg-premium.slack.com is his Slack channel, and I don't know if you go on there whether it has a hyperlink for registration and all that. So we will stop sharing, and I will just test that for a second. So for me, it takes me actually to the Slack channel. So yes, that takes you to the Slack channel if you're a member, but I think it's medical devices group.net, I believe, is the website for Joe's. And then if you click on the button in the top right hand corner, it says Go Premium. So I'm going to share this in the video right now. Sorry. Share screen. And there we go. So that's the page you're looking for. And I will move this down. So it's medicaldevicesgroup.net, and you click on the Go Premium at the top, and that takes you to, and it has a bunch of pictures of Jan and Michelle and myself. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the other names. Is this Nick maybe? I'm not sure. And then they talk about the testimonials here, and then he tells you how much it costs. And yes, I would like this, or I need more convincing. And so if you're watching this, it's worth the money. I have multiple people that I'm paying for being part of this, even though that we don't all attend. It's still nice to get the updates from Joe. He gives marketing advice. He has direct messaging to people like Rick and Jan and myself. He also has fun things in there too. And then there's a regulatory channel, and Michelle and I both put stuff in there. But you could even convince, Joe's very easy to manipulate. So if you want there to be a new, line item, and we need a new Slack channel for this particular topic, he can be persuaded. All you got to do is join, and he can edit that later if he doesn't like it. Another comment here.
Before we completely run out of time, one of the things I would like to do is to publicly and graciously thank Rick and Jan for their support with the presentation today. Their help has actually been incredibly instrumental. And when I mentioned at the very beginning that sometimes the most value-added activities happen in that round circle Q&A discussion after, and they both really were excellent examples of what I meant when I said that.
Yeah, and we've gone way past what Joe normally would, but because I have to get off for my 1 o'clock, we got to say goodbye and end the session. But thank you everybody for participating, and thank you Jan and Rick for being accommodating of keeping you up there for the entire time. We had to do something because Matthew's shy.
It worked out that I was running dual screens because I actually lost connection with my cell phone. So I had technical difficulties, but we got through it.
Good. I didn't even see that happen. And somebody said thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so I got some links to put into the Slack channel for everybody, and a presentation PDF for everybody to download. And we'll definitely follow up with Rick and Jan for some future recordings. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
See y'all later.
See ya.